The Heavenly Demon. Can't Live a Normal Life. By Sanchin. Chapter 213. Secret Hidden Underground. Part 1. It was a day unlike any other. Roman Dmitri, who was training alone, received a report from Hans that they found something in the iron mines. There is an artificially made passage. It is impossible for someone to make that. The underground of the iron mines. They were working on drilling tunnels to secure an artificial road. It was to make the land, which was tightly packed with soil and stones, into a form suitable for work, but it did not make sense that it had an artificially made passage below it. Thinking about it, it wasn't a place that allowed human access at all. Then how did it happen? How did someone make an underground passage, and what was its purpose? Perhaps there was a chance that it was a dungeon. According to history, magicians made their own places and spaces that no one could touch. And so, they arrived near the mine. It was a place where they had to cross mountains, and he followed Morkan's guidance and saw it. Here. There was an underground passage. It was definitely artificial. After moving along the place for a long time, a sight that put an end to the belief that a human's hands had made it unfolded. You have no idea how flustered I was when I saw this. When I first investigated the ground for mine work, I obviously didn't notice that there was this much space. However, as a shaft was drilled, this empty space began to appear, which caused a collapse. Who made this? There was a huge door. At the end of the passage, there was a steel door blocking the way. It wasn't just plain steel. It was made of steel with patterns imprinted on it, and the existence of the door proved that people could come and go through this place. And for Roman Dmitri, it wasn't something that could be overlooked. The endless mountain ranges were an important place on Dmitri's map, and he had to find out what was there. Call Felix. I understand. He could raise his aura and cut it down, but in preparation for a magic trap, he wanted Felix to open it. And before long, Felix arrived. Felix immediately inspected the door and came to a quick conclusion. The entire steel door has magic energy in it. If we try to force it open, there is a high chance that there will be a mana explosion that will cause this place to collapse. First of all, I will use mana to eliminate the possibility of an explosion. It was the beginning of a tedious task. For 3 days, Felix clung to the steel door and drained its mana. It was a tough task that even skilled people wouldn't dare do, and he was drenched in sweat as he worked non-stop. And when 3 days passed like that, Felix managed to open the door in front of Roman. The door is open. Weak. Mana raged, and everyone's eyes were focused on the aura of mana that spread through the steel door. Creak. The door opened, and it was then, as Felix was about to check the other side in excitement, that a violent hand grabbed him by the back and threw him against the wall. That shock was short-lived. When Felix raised his head to confirm who it was Roman who jumped ahead and blocked the path where Felix had previously stood. Right. Papak. Dozens of arrows hit Roman Dmitri. Beyond the door, he had noticed the existence of the arrows. Roman Dmitri quickly reacted by sending Felix back and blocking the arrows with a sword shield. Tatak. The arrows fell to the ground, and Felix was shocked as he grasped the situation. It seems like a dungeon with traps installed. Felix was unable to react just now. The arrows were so threatening that he couldn't sense them with his magic, which meant that even normal humans wouldn't be able to survive in this place. It was an odd situation. There was a trap that fired arrows as soon as the door was opened, as the mana that contained the energy of the explosion would detect it and get activated. Roman Dmitri said. From now on, I will check inside. Dangerous. It is dangerous. There are traps lurking around the place. Even if it takes time, I think it would be better to grasp the existence of the traps fully. No. If there are creatures living here, there is a high chance that they were aware of our existence the moment the door opened. The longer we delay it, the greater the risk we put ourselves at. Wait here. And he took a step. A decision was made, and everyone agreed that it was the best, even if it was risky. Tack. He stepped through the door. He heightened his senses and prepared for unexpected attacks. And after only 10 steps, just shortly after entering, the wall cracked, and weapons equipped with arrows appeared. Papak. It was a surprise attack. Hundreds of arrows were fired from all sides, but Roman Dmitri blocked all of them with a sword shield. Then the other traps started. Arrows would come flying with every step he took, and in some parts, the ground suddenly sank, revealing sharp spears. And poison? A weird gas was released. It was a lethal poison that normal humans would die from, but Roman, who ended up being touched by it, just raised his mana to detoxify it. It was because Roman Dmitri had experienced the poison of the Sichuan Tang family. The existence that created the underground seemed to have prepared a lot. However, none of the traps worked because the wrong opponent stepped through them. And this made it clear. The one who made this place, despite making a passage, didn't want others to enter it. This is how the passage of the Zhuge family was. They were one of the 5 great families of the forces of justice. If the Sichuan Tang family made poison, then the Zhuge family drove the demonic sect into a corner with their brilliant strategies and traps. At that time, even Baek Jin-hyuk's forces had a hard time. Although the Zhuge family were geniuses, there was no way they could handle more force than they had planned. At last, for the trap to work, there had to be room for the trap to open. Roman Dmitri didn't allow that, and in an instant, he broke through the underground traps. The end was finally in sight. There was a space leading to the end of the path, and suddenly, a human's voice was heard. Stop. It was a thick, angry voice, but it was as he had expected. Beneath the endless mountain ranges, there was life. The owner of the voice said, "This is our land. If you come any closer, I can assure you that your life cannot be saved." It was a rough voice. The unknown being was seething with hostility. If it were a normal situation, Roman Dmitri would have stepped back, but the fact that this was an endless mountain range was the problem. "I am Roman Dmitri of the Dmitri family. The endless mountains belong to the Dmitri estate, and we found an underground passage while we were developing an iron mine. Reveal your identity and your purpose. If you can't give an explanation, we cannot just stand by since this is a threat to Dmitri." The endless mountains were Dmitri's safety net. Foreign invasion wasn't allowed in this place, and Roman Dmitri formed the last bastion for Dmitri in these mountains. After creating an environment like the 10,000 mountains, farming would develop on the plains of the mountains, and if time passed, Dmitri would become self-sufficient. However, what if there were creatures unrelated to Dmitri in this supposedly safe place? Their unpredictable movements would bring trouble to Dmitri. Nonsense. We have no reason to talk to you. That is not a matter for you to decide. On the continent, the endless mountain ranges in Cairo's land are what Dmitri inherited. I am not trying to negotiate with you. Should I get rid of the beings who formed a home on Dmitri's land, or should I acknowledge your right to live? Think about it. If you stick with your current attitude, the situation will not get any better. Sheeing. He drew his sword, and beyond the space, he heard the sound of hurried movement. However, their form in contact with mana was slightly different from that of normal humans. It was then. Damned humans! Do not force your damned human laws on us. With an angry voice, the owner of the voice appeared. Short in height, an oddly tough body, and a bushy beard. Their physical features indicated. Dwarf? He was sure of it. They were of another race. They were a race of people who were said to have been blessed with crafts and had similar physical bodies to humans but were different at the same time. Actually, their race wasn't something legendary. They weren't common, but they existed on the continent, and it was said that the dark elves could be heard in the southern jungles, while the voices of sirens could be heard on the nameless islands across the sea. Occasionally, these races would appear on the slave market. Buying them was expensive, and in the case of dwarves, they were usually sold to smithies. And the dwarf said, It is none of our business how humans divide their lands. We have been here underground for ages, and that is a fact no one can deny. Did you call yourself Roman Dmitri? I have lived for 280 years. Even when I was born on this land and received the blessings of my people, humans never showed up here. On what grounds do you claim this land as yours? His voice was full of hostility. The other races hated humans. In the past, there were records that they lived in harmony with humans, but the greed of some people who enslaved them led to their relationships' ruin. Now, the emotions that have been passed down from generation to generation are deeply embedded in their bones. So the dwarf couldn't accept Roman because he was a human. His hand is shaking. The hand of the dwarf that was holding the axe was trembling, as were the others too. Seeing how he had destroyed their perfect trap, they seemed to realize that he was an enemy they couldn't handle with their own strength. Even so, he showed his face and raised his voice. If he didn't do that, then their race's lives wouldn't be guaranteed now. A different race that exists in the mountains. How do I deal with them? That was the problem. The division of races was not the issue. Roman Dmitri was more worried about the fact that they existed here than the fact that they were dwarves. As he said, the ownership of the mountain ranges couldn't be claimed by the humans alone. But if they had the ability to endanger Dmitri, the words they uttered wouldn't matter at all. Remove the risk factor, that was the commander's job. Roman Dmitri was willing to shed blood if he had to. As you said, this might be your land, not Dmitri's. However, what I need is reassurance that your existence doesn't pose any threat to Dmitri. The endless mountains meet Dmitri's land. Just as we have set foot on your land, it means that you exist at a distance close enough to set foot in ours. So give me the confidence. The reason why I don't have to be hostile to you. The confidence that coexisting with you is safe. If not, we will be forced to make a decision. It was a complex matter. Unlike Kronos, who wanted to conquer the continent, Dmitri and the dwarfs depended on each other to survive. If that was skipped over, could they go back to ignoring each other's existence like in the past? It wasn't possible. The miners of the iron mines would know about the existence of the dwarves, and either way, each side would be nervous about the other. And from then on, disputes would happen. Roman Dmitri, who had reigned as the heavenly demon, had seen such troubles pop up countless times, so he wanted to clear up any misunderstanding immediately. As if part of the endless mountain ranges were their land, the other part was Dmitri's. Dmitri's history had proven it, and this time, the issue had nothing to do with divisions. Are you sure? How can we be sure of that? The dwarf was a bit taken aback. He didn't want war, but Roman's answer also didn't seem right. It was at that moment that the dwarf, who was still thinking, saw Roman Dmitri's sword. At that moment, his eyes shone. Even knowing that he shouldn't act like that in such a situation, he was immersed in the sword. Can I take a look at the sword? It was a question that didn't fit the situation. Chapter 214. Secret Hidden Underground. Part 2. Dwarves. From the moment they took their first step, they held a hammer and lived their entire lives in front of the flames. He had heard of the rumors. They showed a fanatical obsession with everything that was made in the forge, and they showed infinite respect for works of art. Their instinct didn't discriminate between the time and place for it. Even in the current situation where their estate was being claimed, the dwarf's body and mind were different. Roman Dmitri's sword was spectacular. The dwarf couldn't come to his senses as he looked at the sword that was shining in his eyes. It sounds insane for me to ask you to look at your sword when I was yelling just now, but just a minute. No, 3 minutes. Can you show me your sword just once? If you grant me that request, I will consider the compromise with Dmitri in a positive light. His voice became muffled, and Roman Dmitri stared at his opponent. Giving his sword to an opponent he wasn't familiar with wasn't right, but he could see the desire in the eyes of the dwarf. It looked like the eyes of a child. The artisans whom Roman had met always had the same eyes when they looked at art. It was a familiar reaction, and he knew that there wouldn't be any problem if he handed him the sword. Around 30 meters. He checked that distance through his senses. There were several dwarfs beyond his vision, and the information about their movements was made clear in his head. 1 in a million. He was confident he could block any variables. In addition, with Roman Dimitri's experience, he was convinced that if he showed them his sword, it would give him the chance to advance a new relationship with the dwarves. The dwarves don't hold any grudges against Dimitri. Then there is no reason for me to be so on guard. Roman Dimitri wasn't a murderer. He was only cruel when he needed to be, and he would only take down any relationships that couldn't be made. Take my sword. At that point, the dwarf responded with different emotions. At first, he reacted cautiously because he didn't trust Roman, but then he soon accepted the sword with trembling hands. It looked like he would burst into tears any minute. As he examined every nook and cranny of the sword, he could not hide his admiration. There is a sword like this? The strength of the sword and its shape were all perfect. However, that alone couldn't be called art in the world of the dwarves, but Roman Dimitri's sword showed the nature of accepting the energy of nature, which was why it was truly miraculous. The dwarves have always wanted to make a sword that could transcend the realm of just being an object, and the sword in front of him seemed to be the answer to that. Thud. His heart pounded. As if he were handling a child, he held the sword very carefully. Who made this sword? He could think of a couple of figures. It was impossible with the current level of humans, and he thought that a few ancestors of the dwarves could have created this. It wasn't a conclusion based on prejudice. With the skills humans have had for the last 100 years or so, there wasn't any news about such a thing being made. However, I made it. Are you telling the truth? The eyes of the dwarf trembled. He couldn't believe it, to think that the person in front of him had created such a thing. He looked at the sword again. No matter how much he thought about it, hearing that unbelievable fact made him caress the sword and close his eyes. The memory of the sword, he read the process of how it was made. It was a special ability that only the dwarves had, and as the space around him changed, the surroundings turned into a workshop. Everything in the underground completely vanished. The dwarf plunged into the moment the sword was born, and at the same time, flames spewed out, and Roman Dimitri's figure appeared. Weak. Weak. Kong. Kong. Roman Dimitri was pounding on the steel. His upper body was unclothed, and his gaze on the sword showed how committed he was. It was admirable. Roman Dimitri was clearly a craftsman. He wasn't just an ordinary human. He was of the same kind as them. It was then. Weak. The flame roared. The flames of the furnace shook and wrapped themselves around Roman, and the dwarf almost screamed at the intense sight, forgetting it was just a memory. It was dangerous. The fire was a force that even the dwarves would handle with care, and it was clear that the human body was a lot weaker than theirs. However, the situation he was worried about didn't happen. The flames didn't do anything. Roman Dimitri accepted the flames around his body, and rather, he continued to hit the steel. The dwarf was shocked. Roman Dimitri's appearance made him look like he was an incarnation of fire. Before he realized it, tears flowed down his face, and the memories of the sword ended. The emotional afterglow didn't vanish. The dwarf looked at Roman with completely different eyes than before and said, "If it is you, it might be possible. Please handle our land." His attitude changed. The dwarf, who had been yelling at him not to get closer, now treated Roman like a noble. "You want your land to be handled? What do you mean?" Roman Dimitri also decided to show respect to his opponent. The dwarf calmed down and spoke. "Before I speak of my request, you should know why the dwarfs migrated down to this place. In fact, the Endless Mountains is a name given by humans. Contrary to what humans think, there is an end to the Endless Mountains. Arcady. That is what we call what is beyond the Endless Mountains, and it is a harmonious world where all races live. Beyond the mountains, a new world opened up. Various forms of life lived there, as did other races like elves and dwarves. If the incident that plunged the different races into despair hadn't happened, then the dwarfs wouldn't have set foot in this place. A very long time ago. At a time when the human world wasn't as developed as it is now, an unknown cold wave broke out across the mountain ranges. As a result, the ground froze, and even the world tree, which was the foundation for this world, withered. That was the start of the disaster. The elves guarding the world tree tried their best to save it, but no matter what they did, they couldn't revert it back to its original form. At that time, many races died. The different races that promised to live in Arcady until the end died from the cold and hunger, and the ancestors of the dwarves at the time couldn't help but make a decision for the survival of our race. And so, we came here and settled in this place. It was a long time ago. It was such a long time ago that it couldn't even be given a date. And the reason why the dwarf explained what happened beyond the endless mountains was that it had something to do with the main point he was going to talk about. About several decades ago, we found a mass of fire demons deep underground. It has such a dangerous power that it could burn down the whole world, but if used correctly, it is also the only hope of melting the world tree. Roman Dimitri. I have only met you for the first time today. But at a time when we cannot even dare approach the fire, I believe that it is God's will for me to meet you, who can freely handle the flames. I beg you. Please bring me the fire demon. If you can make this request, I will do anything in the name of Brown Rock, who leads the dwarves. The relationship that started with angry words is now entering a new phase. Brown Rock. When the dwarves were born, they used the surrounding nature to catch the eye of their mother so they could be given a name. In a world where only brown rocks were present, the new leader of the dwarves turned into a symbol, representing the Dark Ages. And at his request, Roman Dimitri was lost in thought. Do I need to help them? This fire. It could be a dangerous force. It would be different from the normal fire that he handles, and the request could cost him his life. The reward he spoke of also meant nothing. The relationship with the dwarves could be somehow solved, and there was no reason to give them what they wanted. In addition, they could be using him as collateral. But Roman Dimitri felt a strong pull towards them. He thought that the series of events that happened could be his fate. This life is not the life I hoped for. I accepted death, and when I opened my eyes, I was existing as a person called Roman Dimitri. At first, I didn't think it was fate guiding me. Dimitri's fool wasn't great enough to talk about things like fate. I lived in the reality he made. One day, and then 2 days. Time passed, and the things he had experienced until now began to form a link before he realized it. Living as Roman Dimitri, was it a coincidence that I met similar people in the past? Dimitri came from a family of blacksmiths, which isn't common, and the endless mountains are like the 100,000 mountains of the heavenly demon sect. I am walking down the same path as in the past, but I am also taking a different path at the same time. My experience in the past is helping me with my current one. And he found the dwarves in the endless mountains. They admired his sword and his ability to handle fire, which made him their savior. This was fate. If he wasn't born as Roman Dimitri, he wouldn't have gotten this chance. If the development of the iron mines hadn't occurred, this wouldn't have happened. If he wasn't someone who could handle the infernal flame arts, he wouldn't be asked to fulfill this request. The moment any of those conditions weren't met, this situation wouldn't have happened at all. I have just entered the next level. If accepting the fire is an ordeal too difficult for me to handle, I will be guided by nature. And for me to meet the dwarves only after stepping to a higher level, can all of this really be discarded as a simple coincidence? Isn't there a clear reason why I, who had lived in Murim and had nothing in relation to this world, was given this life? These questions had no answers. Heavenly demon Baek Jung-hyuk, he lived by cursing fate. As he struggled at the bottom of life, he cursed God numerous times for letting him be born. However, it was different now. Life gave everyone tests, and it was Baek Jung-hyuk's choices that made him the heavenly demon and helped him overcome all troubles. The beings who died for him. Because of their fate, they couldn't find a way out and continuously fought and aimed for the lives of others. Fate. he believed in it. Each person had their own reality, but he didn't think that it determined everything. So, let's find out what brought me to this place. Without considering the relationship with the dwarves, this was a decision he had to make for himself. I will accept the request. The reply came after silence, and Brown Rock looked like he had won the world. They took a step to the bottommost place. They went all the way down. The growing heat wasn't a natural one, and at some point, Brown Rock stopped and said, "From now on, this is an area we cannot enter. The fire in there is dangerous. Please take care of yourself. If you can give us a clue to save the world tree, we will consider you our lifelong benefactor." Their words weren't a major issue. As he was focusing, he stepped inside, and after moving for a while, he saw something unbelievable. At the center of that place, a fire was raging. It was like a small sun, and it felt like directly looking at it would make people blind. "Whatever has brought me here, I will live for the things I believe and follow them." He approached the fire demon. As he faced the flaming heat, he brought out his hand. At that moment, weak. A tremendous heat engulfed Roman Dimitri's body. Chapter 214. Secret Hidden Underground. Part 2. The heat was too strong. As the flames engulfed his body, Roman felt like the flames were sucking him inside, and the heat was burning him down. "This is bad." Weak. He was out of breath. The flames were so hot and roaring brightly that they blinded him, and the state of invulnerability that he had to cold and heat had no effect. Terrible pain radiated in every part of his body that was touched by the flames. The cold energy did block the heat to some extent, but the flames of this fire demon were so different from normal flames. This was infernal. However, he had already expected it. If this was something that could melt the frozen world tree, then he knew that controlling it wouldn't be easy. Infernal fire arts. Weak. He began to raise his mana. The energy in his dantian began to circulate around his body to push out the flames. A massive explosion erupted from within him. Every time his mana and the flames collided, Roman Dimitri's face would turn red, and his skin would crack. And the moment he got pushed back even once, he knew that the situation would be irreversible. The fire he was facing now wasn't something he had faced before. "The only way to fight the fire that is around me is to accept it. As if the flames are being controlled by the infernal fire arts, I will embrace them slowly. Even if the heat burns down my skin and pushes me into unbearable pain, I need to become one with it." Weak. The fire intensified. As Roman Dimitri drew his breath and embraced the flames of the fire demon burned as if in rage. It seemed like he understood why the dwarves didn't want to touch it. The mass that was tightly packed with fire showed how savage it would be if someone got close to it. His skin was melting. Parts of his body that couldn't handle the heat began to fall to the ground, causing him unimaginable pain. But still, Roman Dimitri didn't step back. Living a life of struggle and suffering, he accepted that as his reality, and his body didn't escape the control of his mind under any circumstances. He had the strongest control. It was a firmer force than the pain of the flames. The flames of the fire demon tried to break his mind by pushing him through pain, but Roman's head was as calm as a ship in a typhoon. Now, weak. He opened all his senses to the fullest and accepted the fire. The human stage. Once his body was suitable for nature, he would become one with nature through the stage of intellect. Also, the flames of the fire demon were a part of nature. The fire was surely chaotic, yet it was the most basic force, and Roman Dimitri's intention was to assimilate with the fire that caused pain to his body. And from then on, his skin began to regenerate at the same pace as it was melting. While burning, his body continued to restructure itself, and the skin that had melted was regenerating. If he hadn't taken a step higher before coming here, this fire would have eaten him alive. It was Roman's fate to come here and meet the fire demon that appeared in this place. Wouldn't accepting the flames be what the being that had brought him to the salamander continent also wished for? Then what was the purpose that this fire had? He had never made a choice against his will as he lived as Roman Dimitri, and that would still continue to be the case. Protecting the land and becoming strong, that was it. As for the issue related to the world tree, he took the risk because their interests aligned. If the path I am moving on and the purpose that my destiny desires are the same, it isn't the result of fate but a life created from my choices. I thought it was fate that had led me to this flame, and I accepted the pain on my own terms. Weak. The fire roared. In the heat that burned fiercely as if it was going to destroy him, Roman Dimitri withstood the pain. Weak. Wind rose. The flames that were sticking to his skin began to get pushed back, and Roman's skin quickly regenerated. As it returned to its original form, the flames could no longer burn Roman's body. At that moment, Roman Dimitri's consciousness had fallen somewhere beyond the world. The salamander continent. The beginning of this world that the people lived in came from flames. Salamander appeared in the world, and it coughed up a fire that was strong enough to burn everything, and what crumbled from that ended up as the foundation of this continent. People accepted that as a legend and orally spoke about it to each generation, but the person who first spoke of that said he didn't know the full truth. A world made from fire. Roman Dimitri plunged into the source, and when he opened his eyes, there was fire everywhere, and it burned everything red. He who has received the blessing of flames. Accept me. My heavenly order is tied to you with a link. A voice echoed through the space. The flame was shining everywhere, expressing its presence. The power that the fire demon held was amazing. Just as Felix manifested the power to burn the world by summoning the fire spirit, if he accepted this, he would be able to enter an entirely different level than before. But Roman Dimitri didn't accept the devil's words. Looking at the fire demon, who spoke sweet words by mentioning the heavenly order, he showed unwavering eyes. I do not care who you are. If you want to join me, you will follow me. Fate and order, or words that spoke of such an irresistible connection. Roman Dimitri wanted to hold this power. The fire demon told him that if he wanted to accept this power, it wanted the human to be under its control. That was the life of Baek Jung-hyuk, the heavenly demon. Even when he fell to the coldest bottom, even when he was forced to go through trials because he was the son of the heavenly demon, he always broke the chain of fate and rose to the top. Always. The initiative of life was in him. The cruel reality may have been driven by fate, but it was one's willingness that made it happen. Weak. The flames distorted, and then came a laugh. Such an incredible answer. Weak. Rumble. There was an explosion. The fire covered the land, and Roman Dimitri's existence was swept away by it. Even at the moment when everything was vanishing, Roman's spirit remained intact, and he watched the process of being pulled into the fire. When he opened his eyes, his throat felt dry. When he raised his body a little with a frowning expression, the first thing he saw was someone who looked like Brown Rock. You really succeeded. It was Brown Rock. He looked thrilled. The dwarves found the fire demon that could save the world tree by chance, but they couldn't touch it because they would die, so they had to bite down on their anger. And from beyond the endless mountains, there was a world that Brown Rock's generation had never experienced but that their blood had longed for. And at the thought that someone from there could finally save the tree, he couldn't hide his emotions. Tuck. Take this. Roman Dimitri handed him something. It was the fire demon. It was like a crystal. It was a small, reddish bead that contained a burning flame inside that was enough to make one feel warm at the touch of it. The dwarf who touched it trembled. Actually, they thought that the human would be greedy, but he kept his promise. Humans, they didn't like them. Their ancestors' experiences of the greed of humans were passed down to them as lore. However, Roman Dimitri was different. Brown Rock, who led the dwarves, remembered the benefit they got from the man. While Roman Dimitri was fighting with those flames, I had a few conversations with Dimitri's people. I heard that Dimitri is a city blessed with people who are blacksmiths. In return for this, apart from the favor that Roman Dmitri is asking, we, the dwarf race, will devote ourselves to the Dmitri family from now on. We will pass on our blacksmith skills for the development of your people, and we will build a solid wall so that no one can invade Dmitri. If needed, we will even prepare weapons to arm your soldiers." His voice trembled. He was expressing his gratitude. "The elves who occasionally bring us news said this to me. The cold wave in Arcady is getting worse with each day, and now the life of the world tree has reached its limit. We are on the verge of losing our home. If it weren't for Mr. Roman's help, we would have given up." He was crying. For the last 280 years, he has lived in this underground. Their ancestors said that the dwarves had a home in the vast lands, but Brown Rock had never seen them. Roman Dmitri. He didn't know this human, but he gave him hope. Brown Rock didn't think of Roman Dmitri as a passing relationship. Roman Dmitri said, "That is enough. Dmitri will never be against you." A reason to trust and a reason not to be hostile. Brown Rock's eyes were proof of them. The case was settled. The development of the iron mines had been halted, but the blacksmiths were rather excited to have a close relationship with the dwarves. The skills of the dwarves, wasn't it the dream of all blacksmiths to learn from them? And on that day, Roman Dmitri stood alone in the training hall. He raised his sword and created aura, and the energy of flame sparked. The flames of the fire demon have settled inside my Dantian. In the world he was in when it happened, he knew the fire demon was real. The process of accepting it was now a reality, and Roman Dmitri felt his Dantian burn. The crystals that he had given to Brown Rock were just a part of it. However, with that alone, the purpose that Brown Rock had wanted him to fulfill was over. At his will, the flames roared. It was unlike magic, and it had the power to manipulate fire. I need to think about how to use this in the future. What was certain was that he had taken a great stride this time. The reconstruction of my body by itself had to be the main thing. Lately, he has taken a step into a new stage. However, due to an unintentional change in his training, he was able to step up to a higher level than before. It was a growth rate that was overwhelming, even compared to his previous life. In his past life, it took him a considerable amount of time to reach that level, but in this life, he shortened it by a shocking amount of time. For now, he had to check his strength and see how much he had changed. What was the power of this flame? In order to defeat his opponents in the future, he had to figure out how far he could go. He took a step. The shadows, the assassins of a Quarch, and the fire demon. Even after experiencing such a series of events, Roman didn't take a rest and headed to the workshop, where people weren't allowed to enter. And just like that. Kick. Thud. For his closed room training, he disappeared into the darkness. 1 month later, Hans headed to where Roman Dmitri was training. He said he would be back in 1 month. He walked hurriedly. A few days ago, a guest arrived looking for Roman. Of course, Hans told the person to come back again as he was now in closed room training, but the guest was so stubborn that several days had already passed since he stayed in Dmitri. So for that person's sake, he had to bring Roman to him. When he arrived at the workshop, he found Roman, who had already come out of the door. "Young master. Did you finish your training?" Thankfully, I was able to focus on my training. While I was gone, were there any special problems? There was a guest who came looking for you. Please go there at once. He has been waiting for the young master for several days. He did call that person a guest, but it felt odd. Hans's reaction meant that he was a new face. So he headed to the guest room. And the person who was waiting there impatiently got up with a bright face at the sight of Roman. "Nice to meet you. I am Count London of Redford." Count London. He was a first-degree assassination target on a Quarch list. He was the guest who came for Roman. And at the same time, Hans, who went to clean up the place where Roman had been training, opened his mouth wide at the charred place. It was a sight that couldn't be explained unless one was in a place that had been burned. He couldn't understand just what had happened in this place.